What if one of the most important tools for powering the Sahel no longer had to arrive as a finished product from thousands of miles away? What if more of it could be manufactured by African workers inside Africa, creating not only electricity but also jobs, technical knowledge, and economic value that stays closer to home? That question takes us to Kosodo, an industrial area in Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso. Here stands Faso Energy, a pioneering photovoltaic module manufacturer whose factory represented a major industrial first for Burkina Faso and West Africa. The initial investment was approximately 3.25 billion CFA francs, roughly $5.8 million at the approximate exchange rate of that period. At different stages, the factory has been reported with production capacity around 60 megawatts annually and the technical possibility of expanding toward 200 megawatts per year. That larger figure is potential capacity, not confirmed current production. But those numbers reveal only half the story. Burkina Faso receives abundant sunlight. Mali does too, so does Niger. Yet, having sunlight is not the same as controlling the industrial system that turns that sunlight into electricity. That is where the real question begins. Faso Energy has warned about competition from inexpensive imported solar panels, including products it says fail to meet adequate quality standards. At the same time, locally manufactured modules have struggled to gain the recognition and place Faso Energy wants within domestic energy projects. So what happens if Burkina Faso decides that solar power should mean more than installing imported equipment? What happens if manufacturing, technical skills, quality testing, maintenance, and eventually more parts of the supply chain are built inside the region? And could a factory in Ouagadougou someday serve not merely Burkina Faso but a wider market connecting Mali and Niger through the alliance of Sahel states? If you believe Africa's economic future deserves examination beyond headlines and slogans, follow this channel as we investigate what these changes could actually mean. Because this story is no longer simply about a solar panel. It is about who creates the value behind it, who gets the jobs, and ultimately who gains greater control over the economic future of the Sahel. A solar panel carrying the label "Made in Burkina Faso" raises an important question: how much of that panel is actually made in Burkina Faso? The answer matters because economic sovereignty is not achieved simply by putting a national label on a finished product. Think of a solar panel as part of a much longer industrial chain. Before sunlight becomes electricity, manufacturers need materials, solar cells, glass, frames, electrical components, machinery, testing equipment, assembly workers, transportation, installation, and maintenance. Faso Energy has brought an important part of that chain onto Burkinabe soil. Its factory manufactures photovoltaic modules in Ouagadougou, where panels are assembled and subjected to quality controls. But available evidence does not show that Burkina Faso currently produces every major component of those modules domestically. Some machinery and technology used by the factory originated outside Africa, and there is not enough reliable evidence to claim that the silicon wafers and solar cells themselves are manufactured locally. That distinction should not diminish what has already been accomplished. Consider the automobile industry. A country does not need to manufacture every engine component on its first day of industrialization. It can begin with assembly, develop skilled workers, build suppliers, learn production techniques, and gradually manufacture more components locally. Solar manufacturing can follow a similar path. The first stage is importing finished panels. The next stage is manufacturing modules locally while importing some important components. Later, local companies could expand into mounting structures, electrical equipment, battery storage, inverters, maintenance services, and eventually recycling. With every additional stage performed inside Burkina Faso or elsewhere in the Sahel, more skills and economic value have the potential to remain in the region. This is why the real measure of Made in Africa should not be a slogan printed on a box. It should be how much knowledge is being acquired, how many productive jobs are being created, and how much of the industrial chain Africans increasingly control. Faso Energy therefore represents a beginning rather than an endpoint. But even the best factory cannot survive on national pride alone. It needs customers, competitive products, and a market willing to buy what its workers produce. For Faso Energy, producing solar panels is only half the challenge. The other half is surviving in a market where imported products can arrive at extremely low prices. Company representatives have previously warned that some low-price photovoltaic panels entering Burkina Faso do not meet adequate quality standards. Their concern is straightforward. A local factory paying workers, maintaining machinery, testing its products, and investing in quality can struggle when competing against equipment sold primarily on the lowest possible purchase price. But this argument requires an important distinction. Not every imported solar panel is poor quality. Foreign manufacturers can produce excellent products, and if an imported panel meets the same standards, lasts as long, performs reliably, and costs substantially less, Faso Energy should be expected to compete with it. Economic sovereignty cannot become an excuse for inefficiency. The better question is whether Burkina Faso is comparing products fairly. Imagine two panels. The first costs less today but loses performance quickly, has weak warranty support, and must be replaced earlier. The second costs somewhat more, but operates reliably for many years and can be serviced locally. The cheapest purchase may ultimately become the more expensive choice. That is why Burkina Faso could focus on three principles. First, every panel, whether manufactured locally or imported, should satisfy credible quality and safety standards. Second, major energy projects should consider the total cost over the useful life of the equipment, rather than simply selecting the lowest price on the day of purchase. Third, public procurement could consider measurable domestic economic benefits, including local jobs, technical support, warranty service, and training, while preserving genuine competition. This would give Faso Energy an opportunity without giving it a permanent guarantee of success. Made in Africa should never mean that African consumers are asked to accept an inferior product out of patriotism. It should mean African manufacturers are given a fair opportunity to prove that they can meet serious standards and deliver lasting value. And if Burkina Faso can establish that balance, the reward could extend far beyond the factory gates. Because every panel produced and sold locally has the potential to support something even more important than electricity. It can support skills, incomes, and families. Behind every discussion about megawatts, factories, and trade policy is a simpler question. What does industrialization actually mean for an ordinary family? When Faso Energy was developing its factory, employment projections included more than 170 direct jobs and as many as 2,000 indirect jobs as the business expanded. Those figures were targets, not proof that every projected job was ultimately created. That distinction matters. But the economic opportunity behind those numbers is real. A solar manufacturing industry needs more than workers standing beside an assembly line. It can require technicians who inspect electrical performance, warehouse employees who manage equipment, drivers who move products, installers who place panels on rooftops, electricians who connect systems, sales teams who reach customers, and maintenance workers who keep equipment operating. Each additional activity performed locally represents another opportunity for income and knowledge to remain inside the economy. For an older father in Burkina Faso, economic sovereignty may sound like an abstract political idea, but imagine his son learning a technical trade instead of searching endlessly for work. Imagine that worker earning an income, supporting children, and eventually teaching younger employees skills that previously had to be imported from abroad. That is how industrial capacity can become human capacity. Yet there is an uncomfortable truth. A factory does not create sustainable employment simply because politicians or citizens want it to succeed. Workers need production lines operating. Production lines need orders. Orders require customers. And customers require products that offer acceptable quality at a competitive cost. If Faso Energy produces panels that remain in warehouses, employment promises mean very little. This is why the argument for local manufacturing must ultimately rest on economic performance rather than emotion. The goal should be to create workers whose skills become more valuable, suppliers that become more capable, and companies that can eventually compete beyond their home market. And that leads to the next problem. Burkina Faso has a population of roughly 24 million people. That is a meaningful market, but perhaps not enough by itself to support every industrial ambition. Now place Mali and Niger beside it. Suddenly, the potential market approaches 75 million people. And a factory built in Ouagadougou begins to look less like a national experiment and more like a possible regional asset. The scale of this opportunity changes when we move beyond Burkina Faso and look across the alliance of Sahel states. Burkina Faso has roughly 24 million people. Mali has about 24 million, while Niger has approximately 27 million. Together, the three countries represent a potential market of about 75 million people. More important than population alone is the enormous unmet demand for electricity. Recent World Bank data show that electricity access remains limited across the region, particularly in Burkina Faso and Niger. That means millions of people still live in communities where reliable power cannot be taken for granted. For Faso Energy, this changes the economic equation. Solar panels are not needed only for large power plants. They can provide electricity for rural homes, schools, health centers, farms, water pumps, small businesses, telecommunications equipment, and local mini-grids. Imagine a panel leaving the factory in Kosodo, traveling across the Sahel, and eventually helping power a medical center in Mali or a water pumping system in Niger. That is an illustration of what a regional market could make possible, not evidence that Faso Energy already holds such contracts. The distinction is important. There is currently no solid evidence that the Alliance of Sahel States has selected Faso Energy as its common solar supplier, but the economic opportunity is clear. A factory capable of producing tens of megawatts annually may appear modest beside the giant manufacturers supplying the global solar industry. Place that same factory inside a regional market where tens of millions of people still need better access to electricity, and its strategic significance begins to look different. Burkina Faso would no longer need to think only about how many panels its own market can absorb. The question becomes whether production in Ouagadougou could compete for customers throughout Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. But population and sunlight do not automatically create a functioning market. Panels must cross borders efficiently, quality certificates must be recognized, customers need financing, equipment needs warranties and technicians after installation. For 75 million people to become a real industrial opportunity, three national markets must begin functioning more like one. And that is where the Alliance of Sahel States could become far more important than its political declarations. Turning three countries into one meaningful industrial market requires more than putting their names under the same political alliance. In 2026, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger moved discussions within the Alliance of Sahel States toward practical economic questions. Their governments examined greater internal trade, homegrown industrialization, harmonized regulations, and stronger protection for young industries facing unfair competition. Energy cooperation has also become part of that agenda. For a manufacturer such as Faso Energy, these decisions could eventually matter more than speeches about sovereignty. Consider what happens when a solar panel leaves Ouagadougou for a customer in Mali or Niger. If every border introduces different paperwork, different testing requirements, additional fees, and delays, the advantage of producing inside the Sahel can quickly disappear. A regional market therefore needs common rules. Solar equipment sold across the Alliance of Sahel States could be required to meet clearly defined standards for safety, durability, and performance. A panel certified under an accepted system in Burkina Faso could eventually face fewer unnecessary obstacles when entering Mali or Niger. That would not require banning foreign products. Imported panels that meet the same standards could continue competing, but extremely cheap equipment that fails quality requirements would have a harder time entering the market. This distinction is crucial. The goal should not be to build a wall around Faso Energy. The goal should be to build a market where quality is enforced and regional producers have a fair opportunity to compete. The three countries have also discussed closer cooperation in electricity production, transmission, storage, and renewable energy. That creates a much larger strategic possibility. Instead of Burkina Faso planning energy only for Burkina Faso, Mali only for Mali, and Niger only for Niger, the region could gradually begin viewing certain capabilities as shared assets. Faso Energy has not been officially designated as a solar supplier for this vision. That claim would go beyond the available evidence. But the direction is significant. If common standards, easier trade, financing, transportation, and regional energy planning begin working together, a factory in Ouagadougou gains access to something it cannot create alone: scale. And turning political cooperation into industrial scale requires leadership willing to make domestic production part of a broader economic strategy. At this point, Ibrahim Traore enters the story. But one fact must be established clearly. He did not create Faso Energy. The factory existed before Traore came to power. Giving him credit for its creation would distort the history and distract from the more important question. Can his government transform an existing industrial capability into part of a broader strategy for economic sovereignty? Since taking power, Traore has repeatedly emphasized domestic production, local processing, industrial development, and reducing dependence on imported finished goods. His government has also used import quotas for certain products already manufactured inside Burkina Faso. There is no solid evidence that these quotas specifically protect Faso Energy's solar panels. But the policy demonstrates something important. The government is willing to use state power to give domestic industries more room to develop. Traore has also encouraged Burkinabe private investors to participate in industrialization. That matters because economic sovereignty does not require every factory to belong to the government. A private company can contribute to national industrial capacity if public policy creates standards, infrastructure, training, financing, and a functioning market around it. His influence has become potentially more significant through the alliance of Sahel states. As Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger pursue greater economic cooperation, the political objective is moving beyond national self-reliance toward regional industrial capacity. Energy, trade, and domestic value creation increasingly appear within the same strategic conversation. That gives Faso Energy a new possibility. Traore does not need to claim ownership of the factory's past. His real test is whether policies adopted during his leadership can improve its future and the future of other Burkinabe manufacturers. Can domestic firms become more productive? Can they create durable jobs? Can they compete beyond Burkina Faso? Can institutions continue supporting industrial development even after today's leaders are gone? That last question may be the most important. A factory that survives only because one leader supports it is politically dependent. An industry supported by skilled workers, competitive businesses, standards, financing, regional customers, and durable institutions is something different. So Traore's legacy in this story should not be measured by whether his portrait appears beside a solar panel. It should be measured by whether Burkina Faso can build an industrial system strong enough to outlast him. Whenever Burkina Faso speaks about economic sovereignty, another question quickly appears. How does the West respond? The answer is more complicated than the popular story of Africa against the West. There is no reliable evidence that France, the United States, or the European Union has opposed Faso Energy simply because Burkina Faso manufactures solar panels. What does exist are broader Western and international concerns about trade restrictions, investment conditions, political governance, and policies that protect domestic companies from foreign competition. The International Monetary Fund has noted Burkina Faso's use of import restrictions to support certain locally produced goods. The World Bank, meanwhile, has emphasized competitive and transparent procurement as Burkina Faso expands its energy system. Their economic argument deserves consideration. If a government permanently protects a domestic manufacturer, regardless of price or performance, consumers can end up paying more. Protected companies can lose the pressure to innovate. Public money can be directed toward inefficient producers simply because they are local. But that is only one side of the debate. A young African manufacturer competing against enormous international producers does not begin from an equal position. Global competitors may have decades of experience, massive factories, cheaper financing, and supply chains spread across continents. Temporary and carefully designed support can therefore give a young industry time to develop skills and reach greater scale. The key word is temporary. Protection should come with measurable expectations for quality, productivity, employment, and competitiveness. There is another fact that challenges the simple West versus Africa narrative. European institutions have continued supporting development activities in Burkina Faso, including efforts connected to quality control for solar equipment and technical capacity. So, cooperation has not disappeared simply because political relations have become more difficult. The deeper issue is therefore not whether Burkina Faso must choose between sovereignty and cooperation. It is whether cooperation can occur on terms that allow more skills, production, and economic value to remain in Africa. A foreign partner can provide capital or technology without controlling the entire industrial future of a country. And Burkina Faso can pursue greater independence without pretending it no longer needs international market investment or knowledge. That balance may prove far harder to achieve than any political slogan suggests. If Burkina Faso wants solar manufacturing to become more than a single industrial success story, the next step cannot simply be producing more of the same panels. The deeper objective must be building an industrial ecosystem. That process can develop in stages. The first stage already exists. Photovoltaic modules can be manufactured in Burkina Faso, even though important components and technologies still come from abroad. The second stage is scale. Faso Energy and future manufacturers need access not only to Burkina Faso, but potentially to customers across Mali and Niger. A larger alliance of Sahel state markets could give regional producers more room to expand production and lower costs. The third stage is diversification. Instead of importing almost everything surrounding the panel, companies across the Sahel could gradually develop mounting structures, electrical components, battery storage systems, inverters, maintenance services, and recycling capabilities. Not every country needs to manufacture everything. Burkina Faso might specialize in one part of the chain. Mali could develop another. Niger could build expertise in another area. Regional transportation, technical training, testing laboratories, and repair networks could connect them. That would turn Pan-African industrialization from a political slogan into a division of productive work. But protection cannot last forever. If governments support young industries, they should establish clear measures of success. After several years, citizens deserve answers. Has production increased? Have prices become more competitive? Has product quality improved? Are more workers being trained? Are regional exports growing? Is a larger share of economic value actually remaining in Africa? If the answer remains no, protection should be reconsidered. This is also why economic sovereignty should never be confused with isolation. Burkina Faso can purchase advanced machinery from Europe, attract investment from the United States, work with Asian technology companies, and still pursue greater African industrial capacity. The important question is what happens after that cooperation begins? Does knowledge remain local? Do African workers gain skills? Do domestic suppliers emerge? Does the country become more capable of making its own choices? Real sovereignty is not refusing to work with the world. It is gaining enough productive capacity to work with the world from a stronger position. And that lesson extends far beyond Burkina Faso. The story that began in a factory in Kosodo ultimately asks a question much larger than solar energy. Can African countries move from consuming more of what the world manufactures to producing more of what their own people need? No single solar panel can transform the Sahel. No factory can deliver economic sovereignty by itself. And no political leader, including Ibrahim Traore, can substitute speeches for competitive industries. Success must be measured differently. Are factories producing more? Are workers gaining valuable skills? Are products meeting serious standards? Are African companies reaching regional markets? And is a greater share of the money spent on development remaining inside African economies? Those questions offer lessons far beyond Burkina Faso. African countries do not need to manufacture everything independently. One country can specialize in solar modules. Another can develop battery storage. Another can build components, logistics, testing, maintenance, or recycling. What matters is creating regional value chains where African countries increasingly produce with one another instead of merely importing finished products from elsewhere. That is why the future of the African Union and wider African news should not be judged only through diplomatic summits. The economic choices being made in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger could reveal whether regional cooperation can become something citizens actually experience. For Ibrahim Traore in Burkina Faso, Assimi Goïta in Mali, and Abdourahmane Tiani in Niger, the challenge is greater than criticizing old relationships with France or promising a different future for West Africa. The real test is construction. Build skills, build standards, build competitive companies, build institutions that survive political leaders, and build a Sahel where cooperation with the outside world happens from a stronger economic position. Economic sovereignty does not mean closing the door to foreign technology, investment, or knowledge. It means having more choices when that door opens. So here is the question I leave with you. Should African governments accept higher costs for a limited period to help competitive domestic industries grow, or should they always purchase the cheapest product available globally? Share your view below. And if you want to continue examining the economic changes reshaping Africa beyond slogans and headlines, follow this channel, because the most important measure of sovereignty is not what a nation declares. It is what that nation eventually becomes capable of producing for itself. We sincerely appreciate your time and support. Every video on this channel is carefully researched, thoughtfully written, and meticulously edited by our dedicated team. We don't rely on automated production or shortcuts to create our content. Every story, every visual, and every detail is crafted with genuine care, passion, and a commitment to bringing you meaningful, high-quality videos.